The sky is a vast, indifferent ocean of air. For over a century, humanity has fought to conquer it. We have built machines of aluminum and composite, filled them with advanced radar, GPS tracking, and satellite communications. We believe that in the modern age, nothing can truly be lost. We believe that every flight path is monitored, every takeoff is recorded, and every landing is guaranteed. But history tells us a different story. Sometimes the sky refuses to be conquered. Sometimes massive aircraft carrying hundreds of souls simply vanish into the void. There are no distress calls, no debris fields, no final goodbyes, just a sudden, terrifying silence. From the most famous aviation mystery of the modern era to the cargo flights carrying millions of dollars in art and the strange, chilling codes tapped out by dying radios. These events defy the laws of probability. They haunt the families left behind and torment the investigators who spend decades searching for a scrap of metal in the wilderness. Welcome to Signal 49. Today, we are taking a deep, long-form journey into the unknown. We are investigating the most mysterious plane disappearances in history that remain, to this day, completely unexplained. The modern ghost. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370. We begin with the enigma that defines the modern era of aviation mystery. A case that proved that even in a world of constant surveillance, a Boeing 777 can simply disappear. The story of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 is not just a tragedy. It is the modern era's most profound aviation mystery. On March 8, 2014, a Boeing 777 departed Kuala Lumpur, bound for Beijing. What followed in the coming hours was a sequence of odd occurrences, calculated deception, and the total disappearance of 227 passengers and 12 crew members. The aircraft vanished, leaving investigators to chase ghost signals and incomplete data. For nearly 3 years, missions scoured the surface and seafloor of the Indian Ocean without locating the main fuselage. Now, we must sift through the evidence and theories to understand what truly happened to the 239 souls on board. To understand the anomaly, we must return to the beginning. We go back to the moment Flight 370 lifted into the night, setting a course that would eventually lead it into oblivion. It is March 8, 2014, 12:41 a.m. 2 hours before the disappearance. Flight attendants moved down the carpeted aisles of the Boeing 777-200ER, securing the cabin for departure. In the cockpit, Captain Zahri Ahmad Shah completes his final pre-flight checks, confirming the airliner's readiness with First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid. The tower clears them for takeoff. Captain Zahri throttles the engines, and the massive machine lurches forward, cruising down the runway and pushing passengers back into their seats. It is deep in the early morning. Many are already asleep. A baby rests in its mother's lap, while others watch the airport lights blur past the windows. Flight 370 ascends, banking into the dark sky. Condensation streaks the glass as shades are drawn for the 6-hour journey to Beijing. What no one knows is that as the night gives way to dawn, every single person on this machine will cease to exist to the outside world. At 1:01 a.m., the aircraft levels out at a cruising altitude of 35,000 feet. The seatbelt signs extinguish. The crew begins the routine service of snacks and drinks. Because it is a red-eye flight, the cabin remains quiet. Businessmen from Beijing work under the glow of laptop screens, the only light competing with the rhythmic hum of the jet engines. On the ground, radar stations track Flight 370's green blip. Everything is nominal. The plane is moments away from leaving Malaysian airspace and crossing into Vietnam. It appears to be a night like any other. Then, at 1:07 a.m., a critical shift occurs. The Malaysian flight tower receives a data packet from the plane as Aircraft Communication Addressing and Reporting System, or ACARS. This system is the plane's health monitor, periodically beaming data about key systems back to the airline. This transmission will be the last. The tower won't notice the silence for another 30 minutes, but someone has manually disabled the ACARS. This was not a glitch. It was a precise action by someone who knew the aircraft's internal architecture, signaling a premeditated plan to sever the plane from the world. With the ACARS dead, the ground radar no longer receives detailed telemetry. There is no alarm yet, as ground crews have no reason to suspect sabotage. In the cockpit, it remains unclear if both pilots are aware of the disconnection, or if one is already enacting a master plan. At 1:19 a.m., Malaysian Air Traffic Control receives a final voice transmission. It is believed to be First Officer Farik. His voice is calm, devoid of stress or agitation. He signs off with, "All right, good night." It is a standard pleasantry used thousands of times a day as pilots hand over communications between airspaces. But in this case, good night are the final words the world will ever hear from Flight 370. 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., just as the plane crosses the waypoint into Vietnamese airspace over the South China Sea, the transponder is manually switched off. Unlike the complex ACAR system, the transponder is the plane's digital license plate, constantly pinging its identity, altitude, and speed to radar. Without it, the Boeing 777 becomes a ghost and nameless blip in the dark. Traffic controllers see the data vanish. They see a primary radar return, a raw reflection of metal in the sky, but it carries no data. Confusion sets in. Simultaneously, a military radar operator in Thailand spots an unidentified aircraft entering their surveillance zone. With no covert mission scheduled, it is flagged as an anomaly. Between 1:21 a.m. and 1:28 a.m., the unknown aircraft does something impossible for a standard commercial route. Radar in the Surat Thani province records the plane executing a sharp U-turn, flying back in the direction it came from. The uncertainty on the ground, the delay in identifying this rogue blip, as Flight 370 burns through precious time. At 1:30 a.m., the blip vanishes from civilian radar near the Gulf of Thailand. The last known coordinates are locked. The plane has gone dark. By 1:37 a.m., the plane reappears on Malaysian military radar, now flying southwest over the Malay Peninsula, hugging the border to avoid detection, before turning northwest over the Strait of Malacca. Back at traffic control, the realization hits. The ACARS update is overdue. The silence is deafening. They begin to suspect the unidentified craft traversing their country is the missing airliner, but confirmation is buried in bureaucracy and confusion. Retrospective analysis suggests that disabling the ACARS was a strategic move to hide mechanical data, while killing the transponder blinded the traffic controllers. It was a perfect cloak. At 2:15 a.m., the plane passes over the island of Pulau Perak, hundreds of miles off course, pushing west into the vast, unmonitored expanse of the Indian Ocean. At 2:22 a.m., Malaysian military radar loses the signal over the Andaman Sea. This is the final electronic visual of the aircraft. Yet, it takes another 18 minutes for Malaysia Airlines to officially acknowledge the plane is missing. Behind the scenes, panic and damage control likely paralyzed the chain of command. It isn't until 2:40 a.m. that the missing status is official. The airline mobilizes, contacting regional agencies and the military. Ships and aircraft are dispatched to the Andaman Sea, the last known location. Messages are beamed into the void on every frequency, met only with static. The rest of the world sleeps, unaware that Flight 370 will never arrive in Beijing. At 3:45 a.m., over an hour after the disappearance is confirmed internally, a code red is finally issued. The delay is controversial. Was it incompetence or an attempt to verify the impossible? Search and rescue operations launch in full force, assuming a crash in the sea. By 6:30 a.m., The sun rises over Beijing. Friends and families wait at the arrival gate for a plane that isn't coming. The arrival board shows delayed, but silence from the airline fuels a growing dread. At 7:24 a.m., the dam breaks. Malaysia Airlines releases a public statement. Panic erupts in the terminal. The story breaks globally, and the mystery of Flight 370 begins to consume the world's attention. Then, at 8:11 a.m., nearly 6 hours after the plane vanished from radar, a piece of automated technology changes everything. A satellite in geostationary orbit attempts a handshake, a routine electronic check-in, with the plane. The aircraft's communication systems are down, but the terminal is powered. It responds. This digital ping confirms the plane stayed in the air for hours after it vanished from radar. Analysis of this signal data generates two vast corridors: a northern arc stretching into Central Asia, and a southern arc deep into the Indian Ocean. Days turn into weeks. On March 15th, the search shifts based on this satellite data. On March 24th, definitive analysis by Inmarsat and British investigators concludes the plane flew along the southern arc. Prime Minister Najib Razak announces the heartbreaking conclusion. Flight 370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean. On April 6th, an Australian ship detects acoustic pings 1,200 miles northwest of Perth. Hope rises that these are the black box beacons. Robotic submarines scour the depths, but the ocean is vast and unforgiving. The pings are later attributed to faulty ship equipment. The trail goes cold. It takes over a year for the ocean to give up the first piece of physical evidence. On July 29, 2015, a man on the French island of Réunion finds a flatboat washed ashore. Experts confirm it belongs to Flight 370. The debris drifted over 2,300 miles from the suspected crash site. Over time, 26 more fragments wash up across Africa and the Indian Ocean islands, some from the cabin interior, suggesting the plane broke apart upon impact. The analysis of the flaperon is chilling. It was not deployed for a landing. This implies the aircraft did not glide into a controlled ditching, but slammed into the water at speed. In January 2017, the official search is suspended. The ocean floor, reaching depths of 5,000 meters, keeps its secret. A private search by Ocean Infinity in 2018 also ends without finding the fuselage. The final report rules out mechanical failure, but offers no definitive cause. In the vacuum of answers, theories thrive. The most prevalent theory, supported by the deliberate flight path changes, is a pilot event. The hypothesis suggests Captain Zahari locked the cockpit, depressurized the cabin to incapacitate the passengers and crew via hypoxia, and piloted the ghost plane until fuel exhaustion. However, official profiles show a man with no history of mental instability or financial stress. While a flight simulator at his home showed a similar route, evidence remains circumstantial. Hijacking theories also abound. Could a stowaway have accessed the electronics bay near the cockpit? Could a group have seized the plane? Yet no distress signal was sent, and the cockpit door is fortified against intrusion. The lack of a ransom demand or a claim of responsibility by any terror group makes a traditional hijacking unlikely. More complex theories suggest a geopolitical motive, a distraction from the annexation of Crimea occurring simultaneously, or remote tampering of the aircraft's guidance systems. Stripped of speculation, we are left with the cold facts. Someone or something manually severed communications and navigated a massive airliner into the most remote darkness on Earth. The ocean is a vast haystack, and the needle has sunk. Until technology advances or luck intervenes, the fate of Malaysia Airlines, Flight 370, remains a narrative without an ending, a haunting reminder of how easily 239 lives can disappear into the blue. The Lost Icon, Amelia Earhart long before flight MH370. There was another disappearance, one that captured the world's imagination and has refused to let go for nearly a century. The disappearance of Amelia Earhart. By the summer of 1937, Amelia Earhart was far more than a pilot. She was a global icon, the most famous female aviator in history. A symbol of courage, progress, and human ambition at a time when the sky itself still felt unconquered. She had already shattered records, crossed oceans, and redefined what was possible, but she was about to attempt her greatest challenge yet. Earhart set out to circumnavigate the globe, a punishing journey of nearly 29,000 miles, following an equatorial route that pushed both pilot and machine to their limits. At her side was her trusted navigator, Fred Noonan, a seasoned expert in celestial navigation. Together, they flew a Lockheed Electra 1 OE, a sleek twin-engine monoplane often described as a flying laboratory, packed with experimental radio equipment, extra fuel tanks, and cutting-edge instruments for its time. By July 2nd, they had completed most of the journey. Only one of the most dangerous legs remained. They took off from Lae, New Guinea, heading toward Howland Island, a nearly invisible target in the vast Pacific Ocean. Howland was a remote strip of coral, barely a mile and a half long, surrounded by thousands of miles of open water. Finding it in 1937, using radio signals and star positions, was like trying to locate a single grain of sand in a swimming pool while running out of fuel. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Itasca waited anxiously near Howland Island, tasked with guiding Earhart in for landing. As the Electra drew closer, radio contact became increasingly strained. Signals crackled. Instructions were misunderstood. Frustration mounted on both ends. At 7:42 a.m., Amelia Earhart radioed in with words that would later become infamous. "We must be on you, but cannot see you, but gas is running low. Have been unable to reach you by radio. We are flying at 1,000 feet. Her voice was tense, urgent. The signal was strong, which meant she was close. Yet she couldn't see the ship. And the ship couldn't get a precise fix on her position. The Itasca began pumping thick black smoke from its funnels in a desperate attempt to create a visible marker. But glare from the rising sun and heavy cloud cover swallowed the horizon. Then, at 8:43 a.m., Amelia Earhart sent her final transmission a message that would echo through history. "We are on the line 157,337. We will repeat this message. We will repeat this on 6,210 kilocycles." Wait. And then, nothing. Silence. The U.S. Navy launched one of the largest search operations ever conducted at the time. Ships and aircraft scoured thousands of square miles of ocean. No wreckage was found, no oil slick, no debris. Eventually, the official conclusion settled on a simple explanation: crash and sink. The idea that Earhart ran out of fuel, ditched into the Pacific, and disappeared into the depths. But that explanation never fully satisfied investigators or the public, because another theory refused to die. Known as the Gardner Island hypothesis, it suggests something far more haunting. In the days following the disappearance, RADIO operators across the Pacific reported hearing distress calls messages that shouldn't have been possible if the plane had sunk immediately. Some operators claimed to hear a woman saying she was injured. Others mentioned a man who sounded confused or delirious. These signals were logged, recorded, and in some cases triangulated not to open ocean, but to Gardner Island, now called Nikumaroro. Nikumaroro is a remote, uninhabited coral atoll, desolate, sun-scorched, and brutally unforgiving. Yet decades later, expeditions to the island uncovered disturbing clues. A fragment of plexiglass, consistent with an Electra window, a 1930 woman's shoe, and a jar of freckle cream, a chilling detail since. Amelia Earhart was famously self-conscious about her freckles. Most unsettling of all, in 1940, partial skeletal remains were discovered on the island by British authorities. At the time, They were hastily analyzed and dismissed as male. The bones were then lost. Decades later, modern forensic analysis of the original measurements suggested something startling. The remains could have belonged to a woman of Amelia Earhart's height and build. So the question lingers. Did the world's most famous pilot die not in a fiery crash, but slowly as a castaway? Stranded on a remote island, injured, watching the horizon each day while search planes passed just beyond sight? We may never know the full truth. But Amelia Earhart's disappearance remains one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in modern history. A reminder that even legends can vanish, leaving behind only silence, questions, and the endless sky. The Triangle's beginning. Flight 19 from the vast Pacific. We now shift to the Atlantic, toward the event that would ignite one of the most enduring legends of the modern world. This isn't the story of a single aircraft. This is the disappearance of an entire squadron. It was December 5, 1945. World War II had just ended. The skies were quiet again. At Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale, Florida, 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers sat lined up on the runway, preparing for what was supposed to be a routine training exercise. The mission was called Navigation Problem Number 1. History would remember it as Flight 19. The flight leader was Lieutenant Charles Taylor, a decorated combat veteran with thousands of flight hours. The other 13 men were trainees, but they were fully qualified naval aviators. This was not an inexperienced group. Nothing about the mission suggested danger. The weather was typical for Florida, some turbulence, building clouds, but nothing unusual. At 2:10 p.m., the 5 Avengers lifted off the runway and headed east over the Atlantic. The plan was simple. Fly east, drop practice bombs over shallow water, turn north, then head west back to base. A mission designed to last just a few hours. But shortly before 3:45 p.m., something went wrong. The control tower received a troubling radio transmission from Lieutenant Taylor. Cannot see land. We seem to be off course. Controllers immediately requested his position. Taylor's response was even more unsettling. We're not sure where we are. We can't be sure of any direction. Even the ocean doesn't look as it should. That statement made no sense. These pilots were flying over the Atlantic near the Florida coast. The ocean doesn't change appearance. Yet Taylor was convinced something was wrong. He reported that both his primary compass and backup compass were malfunctioning, spinning unpredictably and giving contradictory readings. Taylor believed he was flying over the Florida Keys, hundreds of miles south of his actual location. In reality, evidence suggests he was likely exactly where he was supposed to be. But something far more dangerous had set in spatial disorientation, a psychological breakdown in navigation that can overwhelm even experienced pilots. As the sun dipped lower, the situation worsened. Clouds thickened. A storm began rolling in. Panic spread across the squadron. Radio transmissions captured trainees openly questioning Taylor's decisions. One voice cut through the static. If we would just fly west, we would hit home. He was absolutely right. But Lieutenant Taylor, convinced they were over the Gulf of Mexico, issued a fatal command. Instead of turning west toward Florida, he ordered the squadron to fly east, pushing them deeper into the open Atlantic, away from land, away from safety. By 6:20 p.m., daylight was fading and fuel levels were critically low. Taylor's final transmission was calm, almost resigned. All planes close up tight. When the first plane drops below 10 gallons, we all go down together. Those were the last confirmed words ever heard from Flight 19. The Navy responded immediately. A PBM Mariner rescue flying boat, carrying 13 crew members, was dispatched to search for the missing squadron. The Mariner was a massive aircraft nicknamed a flying gas tank due to known fuel vapor leaks. At 7:27 p.m., the Mariner radioed a routine position report. Minutes later, a nearby tanker ship reported seeing something horrifying, a massive explosion in the sky. A fireball that burned bright, hovered in the air, and then slammed into the sea. The rescue plane had vanished. It is believed that a spark ignited fuel vapors inside the Mariner, killing all 13 crew members instantly. No wreckage was ever recovered. In a single afternoon, 27 men and 6 aircraft disappeared without a trace. Despite one of the largest search operations ever conducted, not a single confirmed piece of the 5 Avengers was ever found. No debris, no bodies, nothing. Somewhere beneath the Atlantic, the planes of Flight 19 may still rest lying in formation on the ocean floor, frozen in time. And with them, the legend of the Bermuda Triangle was born. The Morse code mystery. BSA, a stardust. Sometimes a disappearance doesn't end with silence. Sometimes it leaves behind a riddle, a single word, tapped out in code, that takes half a century to even begin to understand. This is the mystery of BSIA, Flight Stardust. It was August 2nd, 1947. High above South America, a British South American Airways aircraft named Stardust was crossing the towering Andes Mountains. The plane was an Avro Lancastrian, a long-range aircraft derived from wartime bombers and converted for civilian luxury. On board were 6 passengers and 5 crew, flying from Buenos Aires to Santiago, Chile. This was no ordinary flight. Among the passengers was a king's messenger, entrusted with sensitive diplomatic documents. In the post-war world of espionage and secrecy, that detail alone would later fuel endless speculation. As Stardust climbed over the Andes, conditions grew brutal. The mountains were shrouded in snowstorms. Violent winds battered the aircraft, and visibility dropped to almost nothing. Flying over the Andes in 1947 was one of the most dangerous routes in the world. Navigation relied on calculations, experience, and faith in instruments that were still imperfect. Despite the chaos, radio contact was maintained. At 5:41 p.m., the radio operator, Dennis Harmer, sent a calm message to the control tower in Santiago. He confirmed their estimated arrival time, 5:45 p.m. Everything sounded routine, professional, controlled. Then came the final transmission. After the aircraft's call sign, Harmer tapped out a word in perfect Morse code, clean and deliberate. STENDEC, STENDEC. The control tower was confused. The word meant nothing. It wasn't standard aviation terminology. Controllers asked him to repeat the message. Seconds later, the response came back just as precise, just as clear. STENDEC. And then, nothing. The Stardust never arrived. No distress call, no mayday, no wreckage, no survivors. For the next 50 years, Stardust became one of aviation's most haunting mysteries. Theories multiplied. Some believed STENDEC was an anagram. Others claimed it was a secret intelligence code linked to the king's messenger on board. UFO enthusiasts argued it was evidence of an alien encounter, a final message sent before the plane vanished into the sky. In reality, the aircraft had disappeared into the vast, frozen emptiness of the Andes, buried somewhere no one could reach, or so it seemed. Then, in 1998, more than half a century later, the mountains finally spoke. 2 mountaineers climbing Mount Tupongado noticed something unnatural protruding from a melting glacier, a twisted piece of metal glinting in the sun. It was a Rolls-Royce engine. As the ice continued to retreat, more debris emerged. The glacier had finally released the Stardust. Investigators were able to reconstruct the tragedy. The answer wasn't sabotage or science fiction. It was something far more insidious. The jet stream. In 1947, high-altitude jet streams were poorly understood. The aircraft had unknowingly flown into a powerful headwind that drastically slowed its ground speed. The pilot calculated his position, assuming still air. Believing he had already cleared the Andes, he began his descent toward Santiago. But the plane was nowhere near safety. Still trapped among the peaks, hidden by clouds, the Lancastrian descended straight into a mountainside. The impact triggered a massive avalanche, burying the wreckage instantly under ice and snow erasing the plane from the world for decades. And yet, one question remains. What did STENDEC mean? To this day, no one knows for certain. The most widely accepted explanation is also the most chilling. In the chaos of the storm, under pressure and vibration, descent may have been tapped too quickly, miskeyed, or misheard, transformed into STENDEC through fatigue and error. A final message, a single word announcing the beginning of a descent. That would lead directly to disaster. A mistake frozen in Morse code, waiting 50 years to be heard. The art heist, Varig Flight 967. We now move to 1979, and to a mystery that doesn't just feel strange, it feels scripted, like something pulled straight from a Hollywood thriller. This is the disappearance of Varig Flight 967. On January 30th, 1979, a Boeing 707 cargo aircraft sat on the runway at Narita Airport in Tokyo, preparing for departure. This was not a passenger flight. There would be no families on board, no tourists, no witnesses in the cabin. What the aircraft carried instead was far more valuable. Inside the cargo hold were 153 paintings by the renowned Japanese-Brazilian abstract artist Manabu Mob. The works were returning to Brazil after a highly successful exhibition in Japan. At the time, their value was estimated at over $1.2 million, staggering sum in the late 1970s, and worth many times that today. This wasn't just art, it was a floating fortune. Commanding the flight was Captain Gilberto Araujo da Silva, a man whose life already read like a survival story. 6 years earlier, Gilberto had been the pilot of a flight that crashed near Paris, killing 123 people. He was one of the very few survivors. He knew what it meant to face death in the air and walk away. He was experienced. He was cautious. And he understood the risks better than most. Varig Flight 967 lifted off into the night sky, climbing out over the Pacific Ocean. Everything appeared routine. 30 minutes later, Captain Gilberto radioed in with a brief update. Operations normal. Those would be the last words ever heard from the aircraft. The Boeing 707 did not issue a distress call. No emergency beacon activated. No radar trace abruptly dropped in a way that suggested an explosion. The plane didn't crash in any conventional sense. It simply disappeared. The vanishing of a massive jetliner without leaving behind a single confirmed fragment is almost unheard of. But what made the case even more disturbing was its cargo. Investigators quickly realized this didn't feel like an accident, it felt intentional. Rumors of an elaborate art heist began circulating almost immediately. Could wealthy collectors have orchestrated an unprecedented mid-air hijacking? Was the crew forced to descend below radar coverage and land on a secret runway somewhere in Siberia, China, or Central Asia? The Cold War was still in full force, and vast stretches of the world were closed, secretive, and unreachable. Others suggested a darker geopolitical explanation. Did Varig Flight 967 accidentally drift into Soviet airspace and get shot down years before the infamous downing of Korean Airlines Flight 007? If so, the Soviets never acknowledged it. No wreckage, no admission, no records released. And then there is perhaps the most unsettling detail of all. In the decades since the disappearance, not a single one of the 153 paintings has surfaced. Not on the black market, not in private collections, not in secret auctions, nothing. It's as if the art and the plane carrying it were erased. The crew, including a captain, who survived one of aviation's deadliest crashes only to vanish in another, were never found. No remains, no debris, no answers. To this day, Varig Flight 967 stands as one of the rarest cases in aviation history. An entire jetliner, a priceless collection of artwork, and its crew gone without a trace. Not lost, not recovered. Simply missing. And somewhere, the paintings of Manabu Mabe may still exist. Hidden, sealed away, waiting in silence. The Romance of the Skies. Pan Am Flight 7. In the golden age of aviation, flying wasn't just transportation, it was an experience. And no airline embodied that glamour more than Pan American World Airways. To fly Pan Am was to step into a world of elegance, prestige, and promise. But in 1957, that promise turned into something far darker. This is the story of Pan Am Flight 7. The aircraft was a Boeing 377 Stratocruiser, proudly named Romance of the Skies. It was part of Pan Am's legendary round-the-world service, a journey designed for society's elite. On November 8, 1957, the plane departed San Francisco, bound for Honolulu, the first leg of a globe-spanning route. On board were 36 passengers and 8 crew members, businessmen, families, honeymooners, people expecting comfort, champagne, and sunrise views over the Pacific Knot tragedy. Inside the cabin, luxury ruled. Passengers enjoyed 7-course gourmet meals, private sleeping berths, attentive service, and flowing champagne. This was flying at its peak. The aircraft radioed its position routinely as it cruised smoothly over open ocean. Everything was normal. Then, silence. Pan Am Flight 7 failed to arrive in Honolulu. A massive search operation was launched across the Pacific. Hours turned into days. Then, nearly 900 miles northeast of Honolulu, a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier made a grim discovery. Debris floated on the ocean's surface. Then something worse. Bodies. Passengers were found floating in the water wearing life jackets. This detail immediately raised alarms. In sudden, violent crashes, passengers rarely have time to put on life vests. This suggested something chilling. The people on board knew the plane was going down. They had time. They were conscious. They were preparing for the end. But the most disturbing discovery came during autopsies. The bodies contained dangerously high levels of carbon monoxide. That meant the victims weren't just drowning. They were poisoned. Carbon monoxide is colorless, odorless, and deadly. Investigators were left with terrifying questions. Had a fire broken out on board, filling the cabin with toxic fumes? Or was something far more deliberate at play? Attention quickly turned to the passenger list. One name stood out: Eugene McKinley. He was a former explosives expert who had recently been convicted of passing bad checks. Even more suspicious, he had taken out a large life insurance policy shortly before the flight. Then there was the plane's purser, a senior crew member. He, too, had taken out a sizable insurance policy. Investigators uncovered reports that he had expressed deep frustration and anger toward Pan Am. Suddenly, the case shifted from accident to possible murder. Did someone intentionally flood the cabin with carbon monoxide? Was there a bomb on board? Or did a catastrophic mechanical failure, like a runaway propeller blade slicing through the fuselage, ignite a fire that slowly poisoned everyone inside? The truth may lie at the bottom of the Pacific. The wreckage of Romance of the Skies sank nearly 3 miles down, beyond the reach of recovery technology at the time. It has never been retrieved. No black box. No fuselage. No final answers. All that remains are bodies found wearing life jackets. And blood filled with poison. Pan Am Flight 7 didn't just crash. It left behind a mystery so dark, so unresolved, that even today, no one can say with certainty what happened inside that luxurious cabin as the plane drifted toward the sea. The Romance of the Skies took its secret to the grave, and the Pacific keeps it still. The Broken Arrow. The B-47 disappearance. Our final case is not just a mystery, it is a nightmare scenario. A disappearance with consequences far greater than lost lives. This one carried the shadow of nuclear catastrophe. It was March 10, 1956. The Cold War had hardened into something dangerous and unforgiving. The world was divided, suspicious, and armed to the teeth. In this climate of paranoia and brinkmanship, a B-47 Stratojet 1 of America's most advanced nuclear bombers lifted off from MacDill Air Force Base in Florida. Its destination was Ben Guerir Air Base in Morocco, a key U.S. strategic hub in North Africa. This was a non-stop transatlantic flight requiring mid-air refueling, a risky operation even under ideal conditions. The bomber carried 3 crew members, trained for long-range nuclear missions. But it wasn't the men on board that made this flight terrifying. It was the cargo. Inside the bomb bay were 2 capsules of nuclear weapons material. Not a fully assembled bomb, but the core components of a nuclear device. Enough radioactive material to contaminate land or sea indefinitely. Enough to ignite an international crisis if lost, stolen, or detonated. The flight proceeded smoothly across the Atlantic. The first aerial refueling was completed without incident. Everything appeared routine. As the aircraft approached the Mediterranean Sea, it began descending through thick cloud cover to prepare for the second refueling operation. Visibility was poor. The skies were dense and unstable. Then, at approximately 14,000 feet, the refueling tanker crew saw the B-47 break through the clouds. The bomber radioed in calmly. They had the tanker in sight. The tanker commander instructed the crew to prepare for connection. Seconds later, the B-47 entered a heavy cloud bank. And it never emerged. The tanker circled. Minutes passed. There was no radio contact, no visual confirmation, no distress signal. The bomber had vanished instantly, as if erased from the sky. A massive multinational search was launched. U.S., French, and British naval forces scoured the Mediterranean. Investigators feared the worst. A mid-air collision, or a catastrophic structural failure caused by turbulence and stress. But the search yielded nothing. No debris, no oil slick, no radiation spikes detected in the water. A nuclear-capable bomber had disappeared completely. Within military circles, incidents like this have a name: Broken Arrow. It refers to the loss of nuclear weapons without the outbreak of war. These events are rare, deeply classified, and politically explosive. Rumors immediately began to circulate. Some whispered that the plane had been intercepted by Soviet fighters. Others suggested something even more shocking, that the crew had defected, taking nuclear material with them across the Iron Curtain. None of these theories were ever confirmed. The most likely explanation is also the most terrifyingly fragile. The B-47 may have suffered a sudden structural failure inside the dense cloud bank ripped apart by stress, turbulence, or metal fatigue disintegrating before it ever hit the sea. But if that's true, then the story doesn't end there. Because somewhere on the floor of the Mediterranean Sea, buried beneath silt and darkness, lie the remains of that bomber. And inside a corroding aluminum shell, untouched and unrecovered, are the components of 2 nuclear weapons. Silent, lost, waiting. No one knows exactly where they are. And no one knows if they will ever be found. This is not just a mystery of disappearance. It is a reminder of how close the world once came, and may still be, to irreversible disaster. The explosion in the night. Flying Tiger Line 739. We conclude with a mystery that sits at the intersection of military secrecy, eyewitness terror, and a complete absence of evidence, one that has never been fully explained. This is the disappearance of Flying Tiger Line Flight 739. It was March 16, 1962. The Vietnam conflict was still in its early, shadowed phase, undeclared, covert, and escalating quietly behind the scenes. A Flying Tiger Line Super Constellation, a massive 4-engine propeller aircraft, had been chartered by the U.S. military for a classified transport mission. The aircraft departed Guam, bound for the Philippines. On board were 11 crew members and 93 U.S. Army Rangers elite soldiers, highly trained, battle-ready. These were not raw recruits. They were specialists deploying on a secret mission to Southeast Asia. Their destination, purpose, and orders were classified. Even their families knew very little. The flight path carried them over one of the most remote and unforgiving regions on Earth, the deepest part of the Pacific Ocean, above the Marianas Trench. Below them lay nearly 7 miles of black water. Recovery, if something went wrong, would be nearly impossible. The night sky was clear. The flight was routine. At 14:22 GMT, the pilot radioed air traffic control with a simple request: permission to climb to a higher altitude to avoid turbulence. The request was approved. The radio operator acknowledged the clearance. That transmission would be the last. An hour later, far below the aircraft's path, a Liberian tanker ship, the LH Lenzen, was cutting through the dark Pacific. Crew members stood on deck, scanning the horizon. Then suddenly they looked up. High in the sky, they saw an intense white flash, blinding, instantaneous. It was followed by 2 flaming objects, falling straight down toward the ocean. The sight was unmistakable. The tanker's captain carefully recorded the coordinates and radioed authorities. His conclusion was chillingly clear: a mid-air explosion. At first, the case seemed straightforward. A catastrophic failure, an explosion at altitude, tragic but explainable. Then the Navy arrived. What followed was the largest search operation in Pacific history at the time. More than 1,300 personnel, 48 aircraft, 8 surface ships. A search area spanning 144,000 square miles of open ocean. Investigators expected debris, anything: seats, luggage, fuel slicks, floating wreckage, bodies. They found nothing. Not a single confirmed fragment of the aircraft. No oil, no personal effects, no remains. This total absence of debris is what transformed the incident from tragedy into mystery. Even in violent mid-air explosions, lighter materials float. Some trace is always left behind. Here, there was zero. The lack of evidence fueled disturbing speculation. Was the aircraft sabotaged? Was a bomb planted to prevent the Rangers from reaching Vietnam? Were they targeted before the war officially began? Others questioned the eyewitness report itself. Some suggested the tanker crew may have seen a meteor entering the atmosphere, a rare but natural phenomenon. But that explanation raises an even darker question. If there was no explosion, then where did the plane go? How does a massive aircraft carrying 107 people vanish over the open ocean without leaving a single trace, especially when multiple witnesses saw something fall from the sky? To this day, no definitive answer exists. For the families of the Army Rangers, the mystery is more than historical. It is deeply personal. Their sons went to war, but never reached the battlefield. There was no wreckage to mourn, no grave to visit, no certainty of what happened in those final moments. Only silence. Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 remains one of the most unsettling disappearances in aviation history. Reminder that even in an age of radar witnesses and massive search efforts, entire aircraft and the people aboard them can still vanish into the night, as if swallowed by the sky itself. Conclusion: the ocean is vast. The sky is endless. And these stories remind us that, despite all our technology, despite radar arrays, satellites, sonar, and supercomputers, we are still small, fragile, searching. The modern world gives us the illusion of control. But these disappearances expose how thin that illusion really is. Every time we board a plane, we place our lives inside a pressurized metal tube and trust that physics, engineering, and human judgment will carry us safely to the other side. For most of us, that trust is rewarded. The journey ends exactly where it's supposed to. But for the passengers of MH370, for the pilots of Flight 19, for the Army Rangers aboard Flying Tiger Line 739, and for Amelia Earhart, the journey never ended. There was no final landing, no closure, only absence. Perhaps their aircraft rest quietly on the ocean floor, preserved in cold, lightless darkness, waiting for technology to finally catch up and reveal their resting place. Or perhaps they encountered something else entirely, a convergence of errors, chance, and chaos. Or a gap in reality itself, a mystery that resists explanation, a question that was never meant to have an answer. And that uncertainty is what unsettles us most. So we ask you, which of these disappearances haunts you the most? Do you believe the wreckage of MH370 will one day be found? Or do you think some mysteries are better left undisturbed, sealed in silence beneath the waves and clouds? Share your theories in the comments below. We read every single one. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the unknown, please subscribe to Signal 49 and hit the notification bell. Here, we are committed to exploring the world's greatest mysteries, one story, one question, one signal at a time. This is Signal 49. Stay curious, stay safe, and always watch the skies.